Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back in DC and at the Phillips. Really reminds me of that wonderful exhibition we did together in 2009. And that was in collaboration with Transformer. So hopefully there's some Transformer fans or representatives here or colleagues, and if so, welcome. But I love working in collaboration, so this talk is going to focus on collaborative projects in the public sphere. Even though the images that you're seeing, the video you're seeing on the screen, it's as a result, it's more of almost like a private meditation, right? So it's a man and horse walking in this abstract landscape that's ever-changing, and it's as if an artist worked in isolation in a studio. But the story behind it is that I did a lot of this ink painting while I was working on the Beijing Olympics. I moved back to Beijing in 2006 and stayed there for about 2.5 years working on the Olympics. I was on the core creative team that oversaw the entire ceremony from opening and closing and all the details. And I was during the production, so during the brainstorming phase, so that's overseeing everything. At one point, I don't know if anyone saw the opening ceremony. There was this LED scroll that opened at the very beginning, and then there were dancers dancing on it. At one point, our idea was to have this ink painting that would happen. It would be like a live ink painting on like a ink and water and glass, and then that would be projected live onto this very large LED screen. And I was in charge of that. So I did a lot of this painting during that period like this. This was like, I think this was like the cauldron, had to do with the cauldron being lit. But ultimately, we went away from that idea. We went to a little bit more concrete, using the body painting ink onto this, the LED. But from that, I really fell in love with ink painting. I moved to the States when I was 12 years old. So all my formal art training is in the West. So I started out as an oil painter. I didn't really have any of the traditional Chinese training growing up, especially in the 80s in China. We just didn't do a lot of, there's a lot more now, but when I was growing up, there's just very little. So Olympics was like a master class in understanding all things Chinese, because we're supposed to present China in 50 minutes for this program. And fell in love with ink and just really trying to understand how this material could be so encompassing. You know, I would get it on my hands, the blackness and the materiality, but then we just wash away with ink, with water so easily. You have paintings at the Metropolitan Museum for 1,000 years, but it also seems so fragile at the same time. So the materiality of this, this ink, which is basically pine soot, really held a lot of fascination for me.
And it's amazing that ink is probably, it's undercurrent of all your work now when I think about that.
It really has, and the color black, and being that immersiveness of that black that's all-encompassing, but it's also a rejection of light. So this duality I just found to be...
And fluidity.
Yeah, really interesting. And this kind of dissonance between the two.
This was done on a glass.
This was on glass, yeah. And everything is painted, so it's all analog. So there's no digital manipulation except through editing technique. Can we jump to the next image? Pause this video since we've seen it on rotation now. Oh, okay, well, here's the title, Making Art in the Public Sphere. Wait. Okay, so this is when it was shown at the Phillips, and I showed it on a rolling kind of scroll to harken back to the idea of Chinese painting. But I did feel, as working on this material, I tried to be led by the material and be responsive to it. I felt a bit unsatisfied for me how mediated it was to show only through technology. I really wanted to showcase the materiality of this ink. So when I was invited to, there we go, do a project in Japan. This is later in 2009. I was invited to work on this hillside, and this is a existing kiln that's on the hill that they could fire ceramics. Usually they will clear out all the weeds, and I just asked them not to clear the weeds. I painted all the grass on the kiln itself black with Chinese ink. And then on the inside, there are 21 steps inside the kiln, and I turned those into ink pools. So they're like reflecting pools. So it's as if also like the ink is, the grass is drawing from the ink and becoming black. And when I did this project, I was just amazed at how because it's charcoal, it's a mineral, right? Ink is. So it's kind of returning plant life from its charcoal at the end of its life back onto the beginning as a plant. And what was really amazed me was that because it's a material that's organic, and even though it stops the photosynthesis process, but the plant is not ultimately so harmed that they will grow and change and grow into new plants in order to survive. So this is an image of before. The left is before the painting. The middle image is the day of the opening, and on the right side is 2 months after the opening. You can see how green it becomes. It really showed me this idea of resilience, of light force. This was just a revelation for me, and this is open to the public. People can come see when we did this project, because even though it doesn't look huge, I mean, there are millions of grass blades. So we really worked with the local community to come out and having to talk to them and saying, why do you want to paint our forest black? And
so what did you say?
I said, well, it's like making landscape painting in landscape. You know, within Japanese culture, they have such a reverence for landscape painting. And instead of putting it on paper, we're directly applying it to the landscape. And then also that it would change with time. So it became a really well-loved project by the local community.
How long did it last?
The triennial was, I think, 3 months, but this was just left until the snow took over in the wintertime. So, but obviously, eventually, the black portion died away. So I've then taken this idea of ink on plants, on life, landscape, to almost every continent except for Antarctica. There's not as much green there, but
next project.
Yeah, challenges in Antarctica. Inking. This was in Brazil. This project was very seismic for me. I think it really changed the way I approach art making in the public sphere. Approached it normally, you know, I want to create something fantastical for this community. What you see is an island inside of a lake. The image you're seeing on the hill is the largest favela in Belo Horizonte, this, I think, third largest city in Brazil. And behind it, where you don't see where the image is taken, is middle class, upper class condos. So these two neighborhoods don't mix at all. When we first got there, I remember we would hear firecrackers, and being Chinese, I would just think people are celebrating something. And the local people told me that it's actually signaling what kind of drugs have arrived by whichever gang member. So different types of drugs will have different kinds of sounds, so the entire city would know. So obviously the police would know, and the paramilitary would know. And they have a truce. You keep your drugs in the favela, you don't spill out, and we don't go in and interfere. And this is the way that kids will grow up. And so I was quite naive going there thinking, oh, I'll just create an island, like a beautiful island, you know, like a landscape painting that the kids will come just enjoy. In ways we did that. So I'll show the images of what we end up doing. So it's a pier, and you would take these little paddle boats out, And the kids, whoops, that's my alarm, sorry. My alarm is a 4:20. It says oxygen. You're supposed to breathe, but right. Or I'm supposed to breathe. So the kids would, or anyone would come and take out a boat, and you would travel in this island. I created this canal. I'm kind of having a little problem. So these are the kids. We were there for 6 weeks, building this island, really got to know them every day. They would come and they would paint and they were with us and they would sing. Someone from my team wanted to adopt them. I mean, it was just like, it's a total love fest. And on the day of the opening, okay, so there's the canal that you can go into and navigate. On the day of the opening, I was at City Hall, where the funders were. There was an official opening, and then I came with the people who paid for the project. It cost quite a penny, and my team that was on site, getting the boat ready for the VIPs to go and see this, they were so angry. They were just like huffing and puffing, and all the boats were out in the water. So I was like, what's going on? And they were like, the kids were so angry because they took the boats because the VIPs were coming, and the kids were like, but she promised, this is ours, this is our boat. Because at one point when I was doing this, I felt like, wow, something could happen on this island, right? Because it's not protected, there's no protection, no security, no lights. What if something terrible happened? I felt, I just felt really unsure. So the kids will come, from the end of school, they would say, what are you doing? I would say, I'm building an island for you. They're like, why? I was like, because it's fantastic, it's awesome, you don't have one, now you will. So I wanted them to have ownership and, love it. So they loved to have so much ownership. They were really angry that my team members who were adults were yet again taking something away from them. So I gave them, me and my two assistants, one from New York, one from China. They knew us, they came, they were like, where have you been? We've been waiting. I was like, I brought some friends. Can we borrow your boats? Oh, this is what they did. Sorry, I forgot a very, very vital part. So the kids were angry. The boats were taken away, but they were chained up. So they shit in them. And the adults were disgusted. So they take the boats, they just took them in the water, wash it off, and they were very happy. So, kids, right? They don't have much power. These were like 10-year-olds. But people will find power where they can. I think it's just really was a huge lesson for me. I said, can we borrow them to show my friends? And they said, oh yeah, of course. So they all came and lent us their boats. And at the end of the time, we were leaving the next day, and everyone was crying. I was just like, I thought maybe I did something, it was 500,000 riyals at the time this was made, which is about $200,000 to build this project, because you have to build structure and all of this, and flying people from around the world to do this. And I just thought, I should have done more for these people, kids, right? I love them so much. I should have built something for them. I should have given them scholarships. And here I am just making art. Like, what good is art when they have so much impoverishment? And kids, if young men grow up to be 25 from the favela, it's a feat in itself, because so many of them get caught in the gang violence. And I was just crying about this, and they were just like, you're leaving? I was like, yeah, but you have the island, and you can visit when you miss us. They're like, but it's not going to last forever. And I was like, what is in your heart? And it took me a few days after I left to think about this, and I thought, maybe that is what we can do, just as important to say to these kids that you're important enough for these people from all around the world, just to create something fantastical. Maybe it's not just, obviously art education and food and security, all that is super important, but art can play a role in creating something inspiring to them. So, but this was a process I was making it,
So how does one get a commission like this?
Okay, one gets to be very lucky to be invited. I mean, I guess you build every opportunity you have to make a work, you go beyond your own expectations. You create something great, and then someone else would see and say, oh, I want something for that, for my community, for this project, and you just go on to the next one. So it took time. This was in 2014, so it took some time to get to, it's not like overnight.
And what would you say, what was the incentive from the community, from Belo Horizonte, to do this?
They were doing a series of public art projects. So Brazil at the time had a very interesting structure that every business had to give, I think, 10% of their net to the arts, but they control how they give. So they don't give it to the government because the government is super corrupt, but they have to find cultural institutions to give it to. And the curators I worked with is from Belo Horizonte, and he lived in Sao Paulo, and he was, a fairly big name in Sao Paulo, but he wanted to go back to his hometown. So he worked with a series of banks that there were 5 projects all around the city, and that was going to be like an annual thing. But then, there was a crash, so I think this structure is quite different now. But this image, you can see the green coming out, so that's I think a few weeks later, you can see the green growing into the yucca plants.
And what happened to the island? Where is it now?
They exist in the minds of anyone who's seen it.
Or in the heart?
In the heart. We did have it open for last a little bit longer through World Cup, and then it was, because in order for it to stand, you will have to put concrete for it to be a permanent. They did, the community did love it. They petitioned to make it into a permanent thing, but you will have to dismantle the whole thing, pour concrete into that pond, and that became like a huge thing, and there was just, unfortunately, no. But I think it's also like sometimes legends and stories, it's just as important as something physical.
Temporality is part of life.
Yeah.
We're all temporal.
Yeah, exactly. This is in Washington, D.C. I did this in also 2014. This is just a little bit after Belo. And so different projects in very different scale and different budget constraints. I think with anything you can make something fantastical. This is really involving the local community. I was asked to work here, and I asked so it took a few months leading up to it to ask community members to nominate an unsung hero in the neighborhood. It could even be themselves. They can self-nominate, and it would just be done purely on lottery. Like, it would not be a merit base. But the idea of this exhibition was called Nonument, so like a non-monument. This is our friend Lance Fong who curated this.
This was also part of 5 by 5. Some of you may recall an initiative by DC DC Commissions for the Arts, and your project was one of those 5 projects.
Yeah, exactly. One of the 25 really for that year, right? So Lance's theme was non-humans, which is non-monuments, which I thought was really brilliant in DC, the city of so many monuments. And I really want to honor just everyday heroes and, just making it through the day with a smile. I think it's just not easy. And so I asked community members to nominate names, and then we literally put everything in a hat, and then we just drew it by lottery. And Alpha Little Storm was the recipient. So I asked her to give me a picture of herself, and then I turned that. So that's a picture of her. This middle one is an ink drawing I made, just turned it to black and white. And then the right is work in progress, how I turned it into ink garden with her portrait. So this is the finished, spraying the grass and also painting the plants. So we were here again. These kind of projects I really love to do on site with the community. We used a community garden to store our plants. Every day we're out there. People could sign up. There were from summer classes. It was during the summertime. So summer classes, they could come. They were elderly. There were, just people walking by. So there were a lot of public participation, and then also talking about, why covering these life plans with ink, what does it mean? What does it mean to have resilience? Here's some close-up, but you can already see some of the green grass growing green. And here are some of the flowers that's blooming. So what's interesting to me is that it's not a one-time trauma that kills a life. Putting ink on a plant is trauma, right? But if the root stays there, and if it's under sun, if you give it water, it can recover. When it's like that, most of them do recover. It's long neglect, systemic, sustained neglect that chokes a life. And that was something, I just felt like this body of work taught me a lot. Being in the public and speaking to people taught me a lot. And this is a very fastly gentrified neighborhood. They talked about there are new and young residents who are moving into a neighborhood, as well as people who've been there for 40 years, talking about the changes. And what does it mean? What does change bring to a community? What are positive and what are not so positive? And there are always opportunities, right, to make it better and make it more livable for all. So this is the park, Monument Park, after it was done, so you can see some of the other projects. Actually, this work, I don't know if there's a, can you, okay, I can. This is from a MICA alum, Michael, gosh, his name will come to me. Okay. At this time, I was making these kind of idealized, I don't know, to me, idealized landscape. Maybe it's not so much for other people when it's blackened in ink, but I think of them so beautiful, like the, I was also thinking about just what it means to be in a more active pursuit of the idea of paradise. So I'm kind of jumping a little bit, but this is an opera I made. This world premiere in 2015, but it was actually 3 years in the making. So I was making the project at here in DC. I was already in rehearsals for this project. So I'll talk about what it ended up being, and then I can maybe talk a little bit like how I got here, or people have questions. So in a nutshell, the opera Paradise Interrupted is a woman in search of an unattainable ideal, of her unattainable ideal in a world that's created by her voice. So opera, I feel like it's all about the breath and the voice. This begins and ends with the human voice. It's a celebration of human voice, but it's also an art form that's fully encompasses everything from instrumentation to story and dance to visual arts, the set. So I made the work in such a way that when you hear her voice first, you see this horizon that come up that vibrates with her voice, and then this flower opens up from her feet and grows. So this projection is taking her voice live into the computer system and generating the images live. And then she also had 4 male counterparts that sang in almost like a Greek chorus, traditional Greek chorus. But she was singing in Queen opera tradition, which is the oldest living opera in the world, over 600 years old. Predates Western opera. The 4 males were singing in Western opera, so we had countertenor to tenor, baritone, bass baritone, so like a full range. And her voice, the female singer singing Queen voice, which does not use the same kind of projection. So it's a much more frail voice that's more in the throat and in the head. So putting these 2 traditions together, and we talked about that, of working with different traditions. And this tree, so when she's in search, she finds a tree first, and tree is made from these lines that would be pulled up. It's almost drawing from the stage, being pulled up and bifurcates into lines, and then eventually will grow foliage, and the whole garden comes. So it's combining the idea of the Garden of Eden with Peony Pavilion, which is a very famous Queen opera probably the most famous Kun opera, or opera in China, which is about a young woman. She's 16 years old. She's in her backyard in her peony pavilion. She falls asleep and dreams of this dream lover and falls madly in love with him. And they have a very, very erotic encounter. And its language is very beautiful, but it's very raw what happens to them. They make love, and the language really describes that. This is from the Ming Dynasty, 500 years prior to now. So it's really kind of shocking how open society was at that point. Anyway, she wakes up, realizes he's not real, and she's devastated. She had to die, go to the underworld, and be brought back alive. It's like a 20-hour opera in full, like in its full capacity. So it's like very dramatic, operatic. But I was just thinking, what if a woman like her, today's time, wake up, it's like this idea, or Eve being kicked out of the Garden of Eden. You've had something perfect, you don't have that anymore. What do you have to do that if you don't have to die for? What can you do to achieve your unattainable beauty or idea or something? So that was my attempt.
So what did she get?
I'll show you. So this is the garden being pulled open, and then we have the nighttime, all the fireflies, anything you see lights are pretty much all interactive and voice generated. And this is when she meets a lover in this secret garden.
So was this for the Met? There were several iterations.
Right, so the Met we had a preview of the Met at the Temple of Dandor, so that was really beautiful. And then it was world premiered at Spoleto in South Carolina, and went to Lincoln Center, Singapore, went to, quite a few different places.
So did the set design change depending on location, or?
No, that would be an artist's dream, but it would be a presenter's nightmare. Yeah. I learned that every time we would present, I'll be like, oh, I have another idea, and they would just like cringe. The producers would be like, you can't change another thing. But then they did get to a point, so I did manage to make changes. I did, but it was really not easy, but I understood that I just loved it, and I thought, if it can be better, why not? So, but it's not the norm in theater world, yeah. This is when the wolves come. She's in a black hole, so there's like animalistic energy. But then this is when the garden becomes really huge. This is in Macau, so this set, you can tell it grew a lot more. This was the last time we presented it, right before the pandemic in 2019, end of 2019.
And this is all paper cut, laser cut.
So, this is all paper, so I'll go into that a little more. This is all digital. So they had these digital screens in the back. It's kind of fuzzy up there. Is that in focus? Okay. So she, at one point, okay, if I can advance. At one point she did find that when this white flower comes, as if she received something very pure and beautiful. But this is the white flower that without going too much into the narrative, that the four elements, the four men created for her to keep her in the garden with them. And she ultimately rejects that. And she says that she realizes that all of these beauty and all these kinds of refinements and things that satisfy are actually imprisonments. So she rejects it all and she leaves. When she leaves, by choice, what she thought she was looking for, the garden goes through a destructive phase. So all this ash come down, and then it was, lightning and all of that on stage, and the entire stage gets folded, because this is all black paper. So this is all paper, folding paper. Gets folded back into a stack of like maybe this thick, like almost like pop-up paper, a pop-up book on the side of stage within 60 seconds. So you see all of this come to an end, and then in the very end, I'm not getting the hang of this. She reappears at the very end with an ink pool, inside an ink pool. And the ink is crawling up her white dress, and she sings one last song. But almost the same as before. She was by herself on stage, but what's really different is that she knows everything she needs is inside of her. She doesn't really need to look for an external place to find her ideal, but that this ink, she can draw anything she needs and wants. So, like an artist story, right? Oh, I have a little preview, so you can, there should be sound. We're not hearing the sound.
Yeah, we had it before. So as we're waiting for the sound, who did the costumes and what did you do in this? Is such a huge production. I don't know where to start.
Right. So I conceived the story. I co-wrote the libretto. I designed. I would say I visually designed. I did work with designers, set designers. I worked with video designers and costume designers, but I did the concept. I did a lot of the original drawings, and then they brought them to fruition. And I directed the opera, ultimately. So on here it says sound X on my screen. Is it because just the sound button is off? I know you don't see up there. Anyway, the sound doesn't really go with it's a soundtrack that runs over. So if we just did the visuals, it's okay. But the later I do have a video that. The music. I had a wonderful composer, collaborator, Huang Ruo. He wrote the music for that.
But the title is yours.
Yeah. And I wrote for this woman, really. So her name is Tian Yi. When I was in Beijing at some point, because during Olympics, we worked with a lot of performers. I was really engaged with just how performers would engage and activate a space, like an installation. I just thought, I would like to maybe work with a theater, like they would do an opera, maybe I can do the installation for that. And I talked to my friends, and they were like, yeah, great idea, we would love to work with you. But, everyone's busy with projects, and I'm a firm believer that if you want to see something happen, you just try to make it work as much as you can. So I was talking to one friend, and she said, you should meet this woman living in New York. This is Tian Yi. She was, in 1999, Lincoln Center Festival did a 20-hour performance of the Peony Pavilion. It's the first time the entire opera was made since, since it was written 500 years ago, because it's so long. Usually it's just in 2-hour increments they will play different parts. So Lincoln Center Festival did that, and she was the star. She was 22 years old, but it was not sanctioned by the Cultural Ministry, so she came at the, basically against the orders. So she came to do that. And even though she became internationally known because of this role she played, and she was fantastic, she's not been performed in China ever since. And by the time I met her, so this was 99, when I met her in 2012, I was talking to her, and at this point, she's worked with a lot of greats. She's worked with Peter Sellers, she's trained with Meredith Monk, she's learned how to do Western operatic singing, she performed at San Francisco Opera, like very accomplished woman, and she's been acted in film. And she said, I'm almost 40 now, and she's been singing Queen opera since she's 8. She's like that classically trained in the program, living at school kind of kind of traditional way. She was like, I've been doing this for 30-some years. I've gone all around the world. I've done all kinds of arts. She was like, Kun opera it's really the highest peak of artistic achievement. I want to come back and do that. And I just thought, when she said that, what I wanted to do with this idea, looking for paradise, I thought that was a conclusion. You search all around the world, you just come back to yourself. So I really wrote it for her so that she could perform in China. And I still can't. At one point in 2019, Shanghai International Arts Festival contacted us to perform maybe 2020 for them, and then the pandemic happened. So now I'm not sure because there's so much. So anyone who knows Shanghai International Art Festival, talk to me afterwards. I really want to bring her back. I mean, she's just amazing. Because, a lot of these traditional arts, there are a lot of very decorative elements to them. So it's highly coded, right? And they're that for a reason. It's very beautiful. But sometimes it gets to be so symbolic, it becomes a little bit too decorative. And she really knows the difference of what's essential and what's superfluous. So in those moments, she's just fabulous.
Tell us a little more about what characterizes Chinese Quan opera. What are the main attributes? How different it is from Western? Is it because of its ephemeral nature, or tell us a little more?
Yeah, it's really two things. It's way it's sung. So the voice is more in the throat, I said earlier, and it resonates through the skull and nasal cavity that comes out. So it's a much more delicate. So they're almost as if they're singing in falsetto, except that's not the word. I don't actually know the proper musical term. So they're singing this false voice. So it's very delicate, but it's much closer to the spoken voice. Almost like, operatic singers, when they sing, when they speak, it's like two different people, right? Two different voices. This, you can hear the human voice in there. And but they don't project as far, because traditionally operas are quite small, will be smaller than this. So people will be all around. They will be, maybe in three sides. And Kun opera is the forefather of Peking opera, of all the forefathers of all the different operas, regional operas in China. It's very choreographed. It's very much about dance. So you have to be as good as a dancer, if not more, no, it's equal. You have to be a great dancer to be a Kun opera singer. So this was very challenging for my four men who are Western operatically trained, because they're less, they walk around, they act, of course, but they don't choreograph nearly as well. And she's very cheeky with them. She would just run circles around them because she's so nimble on her feet. So it's a lot of, but it's a type of singing. Yeah.
In length, you said it's very long.
So they're in chapters. Traditionally, it's like when you didn't have, it's the original mini series. So an opera troupe will come to your town, they will stay a week, sometimes a month, depends on how wealthy your town is, how much you can pay them, and they will play this every night. Every 2 hours a night, 3 hours a night, they would play it.
So consecutively?
Yeah. That's how they would do it. Or if you're a wealthy patron, you would invite them in. You will have your friends come, like a literati garden, and you will have either chapters played, or you can have these longer ones played out. So, this is before, entertainment on television, right? Okay, so moving on to, so I created this, I basically invented a new way of making paper sculpture for me. Originally, the garden from Paradise Interrupted, of course, came from my black ink garden idea, but you couldn't have a 6-ton garden on stage and water them every day. So I came with this, through a lot of research and model making, I came up with this idea of paper being folded and it can be closed, almost like a pop-up book, and then that could be pulled open. And I began to make installation, immersive installations. The opera was really great, but it's interesting that I missed making installations because we get to walk around in installations. You get to see it from different perspective. And opera, performers are moving, but you're fixed. So I just felt like you never got to experience what it's like to be surrounded in this garden. So I started making these installations using black paper and also white paper. And also my exploration went from In Search of Paradise, really looking at the parameters of paradise. What were the word paradise come from Greek word. Para is like the parameter. This is place. So from even the definition of paradise, it's a garden with walls, with boundaries. So you're trying to keep things in or keep things out, right? And I just thought about, well, we're constantly trying to break into or out of a paradise. Even in our homes, parents want to create a small paradise for their children. And what do the children do? They want to rebel. They want to get out. They want to move out, and they create their own. The cycle is just perpetuating. And that society is like that. America is like that, leaving the overall Europe, coming here, creating, and then it's constantly being challenged and being redefined and creating what is paradise for us now, for the current human condition. So it's an evolving change. I think all the things I showed you in the works channeled into this new body of work, which I was starting to look at inequalities of inherent in a paradise built for humans. So this work, I've been traveling to different parts of the world. Each time it goes to a different place, takes on a different social justice issue. First time I did it, so it's called Cry Joy Park. Fold is in Japan, in Beijing, and I was looking at social clashes of society, of social classes, because supposedly communist. I grew up very communist China in the 80s. Everyone's the same, but now there's such a disparity between rich and poor. When I was making this project specifically, Beijing has a population of 25 million, and it's unsustainable because they can't even, just drinking water is an issue. So the city wants to reduce it to 22 million. But 3 million people, getting rid of 3 million people, is not an easy thing. So they drew a graph like these are leftover people. These are people that we don't want. They are of course, always the lower class, the blue collar, the laborers that really built the city of Beijing. Without them, we would not even have the city, but they were considered undesirables. And I was just thinking, when they would just shut down the electricity of these outer villages, and it's right around winter time. The show will open in October. In November, they would just shut down electricity to these villages, and it's so cold, people will have to go to their home villages all around the country, wherever they're from. But artists are often in these villages, right? Because we want, cheap rent, we want lots of space, we want people that can work with us. So we're often in these outer parks, and artists were looking for places to go. And I just thought how strange it is that, you make art makes work that goes into a museum that's supposed to be preserved, but the activity we do in the studio is very similar to a laborer. Whether you're painting, I don't know, a pedestal or painting walls, the act is very similar. Chiseling wood for sculpture or chiseling something for, I don't know, that goes into a high-rise for the facade. So what I did was I created this, so I have a black garden on one side, and I have workers working in the gardens throughout the entire time. And I have a white garden. They're made with the same kind of paper, same quantity of paper, and the space is the same, except by the way it's installed. One was compression, and darkness. The other one was elevation, expansiveness, and openness. So the contrast in the intentionality of creating these spaces. And And this side had the swinging pendulum of this fruit that was creating the sense of danger. And then, most importantly, during the exhibition, from the beginning, I had workers that I had trained during the whole time I was making this, that they continued to cut and create the gardens. So they were probably 80% done, the pieces, but then the last 10-15% were made by them. So basically placing the final responsibility or onto these, we'll consider that time, the laborers that are unwanted, but they're the ones that are creating the final aesthetics. So it was a challenge.
So giving visibility to the laborer.
Yeah, and then we had everyone's name at the beginning of under my name is everybody, all the workers' names. And, it was actually hard for them. They were working on this project in the factory because we had so much cutting and sewing to do to create these gardens. And when I was asking them, I want to do this, they were like, but why? Like, why? Okay, no, we were working in my gallery's storage area. So I always say that contemporary art, there's very little difference between trash and contemporary art. If you put light on it, it's art. If you don't, you can just go into the garbage bin. So an artist had these giant spools of copper wire. He had laid it into the Gobi Desert, say something like, 10,000 meters or something to operate a ice box of beer. Okay, so it's a statement, right? So, but then the spool is a giant spool, and then my laborers or workers were from villages, and they know copper wires are very expensive. They were like, "Wow, how expensive?" They were commenting on that. They're just sitting on this giant spool. I was like, "Well, how is it any more important than your time?" They were like, "Oh, my time is nothing." I was like, "You're putting your time into this work because they think what they're doing is not valuable." I was like, "I can always buy more spools of copper. You think there's a difference between this spool and that spool? But your time you spent with me today, we're never getting that back." And I don't know if it's good or bad. I mean, sometimes I could feel when I said that there was almost like a little earthquake happening, because it's not like I'm operating.
So they maybe felt unvalued?
Well, I wanted them to feel valued. I was like, this is,
Yeah.
But they were just like, oh no, my time is not worth anything. I was like, but it is. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, how is it different? Yes, of course there is a difference between intentionality. I understand that as an artist, because that's almost the basis of what we do, right? It's the intentionality, that concept. But still, the labor you put into it, my labor is not any more valuable than someone else's labor in that case.
Do you think that kind of attitude also derives from social structure?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it is because of the way we're grown up and taught to be. And it took me a long time to all these experiences to come to all this. I mean, even with this, right? So I had them, I said, I give them, they worked with me for a few weeks, so they kind of knew my aesthetic. I was like, but you can do whatever you want. So when the work was deinstalled and brought back, and I looked at it for the next exhibition when we opened it, they were like smiley faces. They were like babies cut in them. They were just things that would not be in part of my vocabulary at all. That's what you do, right? If you're open to that, you're just going to have to be like, yes, that is now part of this garden. So, yeah.
So really, all of your projects are a big lesson to yourself, or for yourself.
Yeah.
A learning experience about human experience.
Yeah. I think you have to stay open to that. And then when this is in South Carolina, in Charleston, South Carolina, I spent a lot of time in Charleston when I was working on Paradise Interrupted, because we were in residence to open this new opera. And I had not spent a lot of time. I'm actually partly from Oklahoma. I moved from Beijing to Oklahoma when I was 12 and lived there until I was 20, and then came to New York. So I knew a little bit of some of that South, like Midwest Southern culture, but I've not been to the Deep South. So living there for about 6 weeks was really interesting because I saw a lot of differences. I couldn't quite understand, like, why. And when the Halsey Institute of Contemporary Art invited me to do a project, I just asked whether it would be okay for me to investigate this. They were like, yeah, you know. So I often would take a project as a way to investigate and go deep into. So, you know, the opera took 3 years to make, and I think for Cryjoy Park took me like a 5-year journey to different places doing different things. So I worked with a local activist, and we were looking at, and it's a very complex project, but I'll just say what we did and not make it too complicated, and we can ask questions. And so I had one gallery where I had the black and white gardens, and then in the adjacent gallery, the black and white never touch in the other galleries, in the other iterations, but here they converge over this dinner table I had set. So the black and white come together. And then I set this table of 25. We used lots of local found wooden chairs to plates and silverware and all of that. And then I hosted 4 dinners and 4 luncheons in the space every week during the exhibition. And every week we came around to talk about a different topic that were really galvanizing local activists from Charleston. And I did this because you know, Charleston is you know, one of the original states of America, at the founding of America, and it was a really epitome of Southern elegance and beauty and culture, height of culture, but it's also had one of the largest ports for slave trade. And I think also as an immigrant trying to understand, come to terms with American history, to say, how can we have, looking at paradise in the lens of paradise, how can we have something so amazing that says the pursuit of happiness is your fundamental right, like, you know, like no time in history before that says that. Then we could enslave people for 400 years. I just couldn't, you know. So some of this, but then I was like, you have to be very careful. So I'm just having a very candid conversation here. Like, who am I? You know, I'm a Chinese American. Who am I to come here to tell people, like, something's wrong with your culture, you know? So I had to be very careful. But I really just thought of it as a way to investigate and learn and try to understand what was happening, what I was seeing that was so different than New York, like people living together. So working with activists, I really were just looking at, so we did food distribution or uneven distribution, because the idea of, you know, paradise is agriculture, food. Everyone's building this paradise together, but when it's having a seat at the table, not everyone is necessarily invited. So we started out with food, and then we went to land. For this dinner, you can see there's soil on the table. That becomes very political, how you zone places and you give preferential treatment, all of this. And then we did one on children, where I raised the tables really high, so everyone's seated at like almost like a child's perspective, on education. And then the last one we did was on re-entry into society after incarceration, because I thought, well, Adam and Eve never had a chance to go back to the Garden of Eden, but had they been invited back, what would that be like? And this is something we do have to reckon with, because we have so many members of incarcerated to have to come back. So these were all things I felt like related to the idea of paradise. And I don't think, honestly, I was prepared for what a hard lesson this was going into these. I was, again, quite naive. I did work with a lot of local activists, and I spent a lot of time there, got to be really good friends with a lot of them, but the issues were so deep and raw. Every dinner we had, so lunch were a little bit more relaxed, a lot more of the public who would come and talk about these issues, and there were amazing people that came. The dinners were really curated. The food was really particular. The chef worked with me on creating the food that would, it's like a four or five course meal that would go with the idea, the theme. And the idea was to first meet nourish these activists who've been working so hard on this and bring them to the same table, because a lot of them know each other but haven't been at the same table. Like a lot of them, almost every dinner, like, we have never said like this. You know, people working in different corners and bring them together and having some conversations. And even within activism, there's so many different camps, approaches, philosophies. There were some really heated conversations. Everyone was tense and amazing, challenging, you know, all of that. But the one for the incarcerated reintegration was so intense. I mean, I just felt like I was slapped. I was just like, and
So did you take part in the conversation?
oh yeah. I would facilitate. I would start.
Moderator.
Well, not even. I would just start by asking a question, or my collaborator who was based locally, and she had already done 5 years of programming public talks on all these topics. So she's really knows that people and the topics really well. So we'll just start with a conversation, and then we'll just go, and people, you know, break into smaller conversation and come together, that kind of thing.
And who were the participants? How did you select them?
So again, I really relied very heavily on my collaborator in this case. It was a woman named Jessica Boylston. She ran this public forum for 5 years locally on different topics. So it was after the Charleston shooting in the church. She was very galvanized. She started out understanding what gun meant for her community, and she would have debates on both sides, and she would do this monthly. So she's been really doing deep work. So when we decided on these topics, because I really wanted to, because it's so big, right? Environmental justice, social justice. I was like, well, let's stay close to the idea of paradise directly. So then we decided on the food, land, children's education, and reintegration. And then from there, we looked at different local community activists or organizations are working, and then also depending on their participation, right? They have to want to take part. I had a woman on reentry topic. She was running an intensive program for men. She works with men. Her program worked with men only. Coming out of the prison system, they have to take these, I think, 6 months course, and they're paid for the courses, and they have a job training program. It's a very intense program, six months. They're being paid, and recidivism out of her program was something like 40%. I know it sounds like high, but otherwise it's like 90%. And she, the way she says it, she was like, she does not go for low-hanging fruit. She was like, if someone already has a family, they had an education before going to prison, they had a home to go to, she wouldn't take you. She will only take you if you truly had nothing, and you would fall back into a life of crime. So she said, she was like, I don't have the energy to talk to other people. She actually said, it sounds great, I don't have the bandwidth to come to your dinner. You know, some people don't, right? And I think that's what's a big lesson I learned, was that, you know, I did pride myself in saying I did a lot. I'm very research-based, and I really do, and I come with the idea of respect. But I just had activists said, I don't have time to educate you. They didn't say in these words, but essentially like, you don't deserve to sit at this table, have this conversation with me if you're asking me these kind of questions. And that was very hard. And like, who are you to even host this conversation? And I did say, I was like, well, I don't have to. I could have made this room into something else. I have a beautiful show already. But if we don't allow people to ask questions and come to this, there's a lost opportunity, right?
And it's about connecting and understanding the other.
Yeah.
I would hope, but
I think for some of the hardcore activists, it's just fatigue.
Yeah, or pain.
Yeah, and it's re-trauma. And one woman said, I don't want more allies. You're all allies. I want accomplice. I want someone in the car with me, driving me away. That's what I want. Otherwise, yeah. So.
Well, I think it's probably psychological and human to in order to cope with the pain from the past, just to put it aside.
Right. Like if you're not going to be
Or not talk about it, not discuss it with somebody who hasn't been through that.
Right. Like they are not going to come here and redo this again. So that was a big lesson for me to learn. So I just want to click through some of these. Oh, here's the black and white. And here's some, this is the, beautiful table setting.
So ink again, tell us a little bit about decor and food and everything else on the table.
Yeah, so I wrote the words Cry Joy Park. So it's paradise. The title comes from Chinese word paradise, 乐园, which is happiness garden. And I put word cry in front of it. So the Chinese title came first, 哭乐园. And then I decided to translate it very literally, just Cry Joy Park. Single syllables and just really easy to read. But then I wrote the words Cry Joy Park, and I did this Rorschach thing. So that's a word. I think that's actually laugh, happiness, laughter, partially.
How many people? 24?
25. Yeah.
And how did you decide the number? Is it based on a table setting or just a good number of participants?
So I talked to a lot of experts that facilitate this, and they said 25 is about the maximum you can do. But you can still hold a conversation, have some smaller conversations, but anything bigger is very hard to hold court if you want to have some kind of, you want people's attention. So 20 to 25. 25 is, we ended up going 25. We're thinking 20, but then we just had a lot of people we want to invite, so we just went to 25. Lunches, we will have 50 sometimes, because people will start, and then 2 circles around. We just have to bring chairs, because the first one was maybe something like 30, but the other ones got to be more and more as people found out about these things. So this is, the food. This is the land one with soil. This is food on the table. I think this is the one with children with it. Everything is high up on there. Oh no, this is incarceration, which was really quiet. I had the woman here, she's a choreographer based in New York. She's the only person I brought in from, not outside of Charleston. So every dinner and lunch, I had a locally based artist, poet, choreographer, dancer, usually 2 or 3 that would bring in programming, read a piece of writing or do choreography dance. Or this woman, she's the only one that I brought in from outside because she has a project called Solidarity Dance. She works with folks in solitary confinement, long term. And they don't have access to much, but they have letters. So she choreographed dances with people in solitary confinement. So they would transcribe dance forms, and she's compiled these chapters of dances with folks that are, have 6 by 7 foot space, and then these dances are made on the outside. So world for either direct participation or for viewing. And I just thought that was so powerful, so I brought her in for the re-entry. And so at the end of this, she had everyone go through some of one of the choreographer who is incarcerated, his dance choreography. I think this is last slide for this.
So at the very end, before we move to the next project, what was the outcome for you and for the community?
I think, okay, I want to go back to that image. Oh, wrong direction. For me, I definitely felt like I probably learned the most. I learned all about the issues. I learned about what it's like to live in, to work in the public sphere. And I had this beautiful work, so I felt very enriched. I was quite concerned about what it meant for the local community because they are being extracted all the time. But this was something I was very aware of going into it. So the first and foremost, when we come together, I said, this is the evening. I want to honor you and, nourish you. And, we give him a tour. I give him a tour of the show. And also, there's just not a lot of opportunity to have a meal inside a museum to say that all the work you've done, thank you. So it's like a moment of honoring them. So I try to make it into like a joyful, nourishing, and an artistic experience for them. So it's not like they're here giving yet more, right, to these topics. And then while we're having the conversation, I think a lot of them just said, we have never sat at this table like this before. And to interconnect and multi-generational. There are people who've been doing this for 50 years, on land misuse, and then the younger generation coming in and making that connection. I think that was the second layer during the dinners that really was helpful. And even during the most difficult ones with the incarceration one, in the end, there were a lot of really interesting alliances that were made. People who were before this out in the world were opposites and would antagonize each other because it gets very complicated, right? Politics, that they form different alliances during the dinner because there's something else happening. So that was super interesting. At the very end of this, Jessica, my partner, she coordinates these talks, so she did like a big talk. So I did the root problem of all these issues we looked at was systemic racism. So I did this project in 2019, and of course Black Lives Matter was already in the consciousness, and it's not something I have to say I was very well that aware of. So this is obviously before pandemic and George Floyd, I think in the larger consciousness we learned a lot more about it. But this is something I was aware of, but not that. But really, when we looked at everything, it was just so clear it was systemic racism. And so Jessica hosted a talk at the auditorium at the school, at the college, which she said I couldn't go because of a previous engagement. I couldn't help. She said that the auditorium was just filled to just bust open. They had to open doors, and lots of people came. And then she had all the people that were invited at the dinner. For each night, the special one or two people was setting up on stage having this conversation, both about the experience of but just as a starting point. Like, it's not to reflect on the art at all, but just on the conversation, where to go from here. And they said that it was the first time that it was an all African American panel, and it was the first time they said that they were being invited to talk about their problems. They were really tired of a lot of white philanthropy coming in, big ones too, and there's a lot of small grassroots run organizations being told by outsider of what to do. And that they were like, we know our community, we know what to do, we know how to attack these problems, give us the resources, trust us, we can do this. And I thought in the end, that was also super, because I watched it live, and it was really contentious too. So nothing was easy. But I did think, to have that, to say that we can actually sit here and have this conversation. And for the first time, this was 2019. How can that be? But that maybe that's the first, that's the beginning of something. And I don't know. I think and I would love to open this up, having this conversation about, I'm of the mind that artists should make art, because I'm not a great, I do a lot of community organizing, but I'm not a great community organizer. I'm better as an artist. I should do things that I can do to make a difference. And I also believe in social practice art, but where does that merge, right? Like, in a museum space, you obviously are very invested in art objects, but then also you exist in this community, right? Like, and then I'm sure we've all seen socially engaged art, I'm sure all of you have seen something and go, I wonder if that's art. No? I also struggle with that. I think...
We all do.
Right? I think for me, for this exhibition, I draw the line, I go, the dinners is a project. Like the installations, I feel very comfortable calling it art. These dinners is a project that happened within the context of this art context. Because I think the way art gives us this kind of, we hope, right, a transcendent experience when we view and experience it. I can't say that, I'm not going to speak on behalf of these experts and their, these activists that they experienced that. I did, but I don't know if they did. You know what I mean?
Did you, we can, I'd love to, we'd love to hear your take on this or questions, but I have endless questions. Did you ever have a chance to talk to any of the public?
I did.
Personally?
I did.
To ask them?
Yeah, I did. Okay, well, everyone says they had a great, what are they going to say when I say, did you have a good time? Did you enjoy yourself? It was wonderful. It was enlightening. It was so fascinating. We need more of this. Yes, they all said that. A lot of them said that. But I think one should be careful when we get that kind of feedback because, it's hard for me to say that, oh yeah, then it was a very meaningful, it's a meaningful, life-changing project for me, but I'm not going to say that for them. You know what I mean?
Food for thought for all of us.
But I think this is, I have so many slides, but I think this is a good time just to open it up to conversation.
Yeah, do we have another project?
Yeah, but this is like, it's at 5:20. Do you guys want to talk or you want?
Because I think it's important to, it's another participatory project, and then we're going to open up, and
Okay, let's do that.
Because it's an important project where you're again in the community in a very different way. So, and then the platform is all yours. I'm going to stop asking questions, I promise.
Okay. So this I did during the pandemic. I was invited to do a project in New Britain Museum of American Art prior to the pandemic, but then everything happened. So the museum shut down for 6 months. Everything got pushed back for a year, and I rethought about what I want to do. What I ended up doing was it's a piece called an immersive. And so I had on the ground, covering the gallery floor, again, the paper sculptures, but now in the form of waves with golden tip on top. So it's like almost like a terrain that one has to navigate through. And I had these two pendulums, one black and one white, in glass, that are swinging in space, creating this danger, but also this idea of proximity. Because I just felt like during that time, this was 2020 when I made this, I was never so aware of like what 6 feet from each other was. Like, this constant, well, I think we kind of forget now, but it's just like this constant maneuvering of space. And then there's a moon projected on the back wall where people were speaking about their pandemic experience. So this was very much right in the middle of the pandemic when I started recording. The first vaccines were just being rolled out. So a lot of people hadn't gotten their vaccines. We talked about how they feel about the vaccine. So this is really, I'm just going to say there's a trigger warning. If any of you are sick of talking about the pandemic, you're going to hear a little bit. It's only 2 minutes of people talking about their pandemic experience. I really had a wide spectrum. This is a 13-year-old kid to as old as maybe one lady was like around 80 years old. So like really the spectrum of people who are teachers and students to retirees, people in the front lines. And then the voices would be singular, kind of weave together, and they will, every 5 minutes or so, I will create this cacophony where they kind of clash into each other, and then it will thin out. And on the museum website, I had the longer conversations. So here you're going to see a short version of what I showed in the gallery. So they're shorter snippets, and then on the museum homepage, on the project homepage, you can hear like 5 or 6 or 7 minute long stories about each individual. so we can just start
And
this.
you were commissioned to do this too.
I was commissioned by the museum.
I don't think we as a society, as a world, I don't think nobody taught us how to be alone. I think we're afraid to be alone, right? So then when something like this comes, which is basically it's a pandemic of isolation, right? So when something like this comes along, you're forced to be with yourself. Now, in the era of checking the cell phones all the time and being distracting and it's almost like the whole environment is against self-reflection.
Frankly, there's certain days I'm happy to be masked, so I can just move in and out.
It's hard not to harbor any ill will towards people who don't understand that side of the equation. Some people will think it's maybe, oh yeah, no, it's not that big of a deal. I know people who've had it and they've been fine. And then you get the stories from some of the, healthcare workers like my husband that are, really gruesome and really tragic and horrible. People dying, in pain and alone. And it's not a pleasant, it's horrible.
I remember when I was a kid, the night I was sitting with my parents and John F. Kennedy was shot. I remember that. When I was a little girl. And I remember seeing the fear on my parents' face, and I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew that something bad was happening, and I was scared. And I remember that to this day. I'm 62 years old. I'm almost 63. And I remember that to this day. It was just, you can feel the fear in the air. And I think that's what it was for the kids. They knew we were scared. They knew all of a sudden it was like, shut down, call your parents, let's go.
I had waited forever to live alone again. I've had two husbands and 3 children. And the last time I lived alone was 1969. And so I was great with this. So I could write when I wanted, I could paint when I wanted. It's a very small town. I live off of a dirt road. I can go outside, nature, I can walk. I did not have some of the problems that some people did.
So just a short sampling. People had a variety of, some people it was the worst year of their lives, and some literally said to me, not this lady, but someone said, it has been the best year for me. Because I got to see my grandkids. We rented a cabin in Vermont. We were together for 3 months. I had never spent that much time with them. So the realities of people's lives are so different. And this project, I worked for the first time with an oral historian. And that's been really interesting. So the way we interview people, it's not with a list of questions. The idea of oral history, my collaborator's name is Nisa Chow, and she says it's like when you have oral history, you're asking people to bring in their emotions in this basin. They're holding it and you're holding it. And the basin's brim full of their emotions. Wherever they go, you have to just walk with them. And your job is not to spill a drop. And so you don't go take, oh, and then this and this. So you just go with a prompt. So the prompt she created for me on this was, what was that first moment you knew something was different? Like this was different from before. What was that like? So we asked them to go into what did it feel like, smell like, what was it like, the tension. So, they really relive that memory rather than just telling you kind of the status quo, like, oh, and then this happened, to have the rundown of events. And then you just go from there. There's nothing else. It just, you try to speak as little as you have to. Once in a while, you have to help a little bit, but really try not to rescue people. That's a huge lesson. Because sometimes people right away tell you something really traumatic. Because people, even though in today's social media we feel like we all have a voice, but still, to be in a professional studio like that, we mic them, we have camera check, people feel really special, right, to have this, and this will be memorialized in the museum and all this. So there is this And sometimes people take time. Sometimes it's like the first 50, I'm usually with them for 55 minutes. Sometimes the 48 minutes is just whatever. And right at the end, they will tell you something just incredible. And some people come and they just give it to you. And one thing I just really had to learn is just not to rescue them when they say something hard, you know. And this is a topic, like a lot of people had a lot of death and loss. Early on, for example, one person was telling me that his father passed away, and Nisa told me, it was just like, in those moments, you just listen and nod, you give him time. Don't rush in. And I still couldn't help it. I had to say something like, I think it said, oh, but I'm glad, you know, he must have been so gratified to see all of his children, all of you with him. And then this man goes, oh, yes, 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 that was. And then I could never make him go back. You know, because then I was like, oh, I should just let it be. You know, he could never go back. And when we go back and listen, and she would say, that's when you lost him. He was there with you. He was telling you this moment, and you had to feel like you need to rescue him. You're not rescuing him. You're rescuing your own discomfort. If you're comfortable, if you let them be, they will be okay. And that was like a huge lesson for me. One of the many.
Amazing. Let's stop with that incredible life journey with you. Thank you, Jennifer, so much. I would like to open it up. We have a microphone here that's going to be passed around, so if you can raise your hand, whoever would like to ask a question. Thank you. Here we go.
That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. When you were a little girl in Beijing, you went to elementary school and maybe middle school or junior middle school. When was the first time you picked up a brush and painted a Chinese character with a brush?
Maybe quite young, 4 or 5 or something, you know. In kindergarten, you start to write calligraphy. That's the first thing. So when you write your name, you have to learn to write it with a brush. So probably 5 or something.
Because that art of calligraphy kind of translates very well into the ink drawing that you did, particularly for Brainstorm.
Yeah. I would say calligraphy is the foundation of all art forms coming out of China. You know, if you're a good calligrapher, not that they are interchangeable at all. Obviously, there's crafts and technique in painting, but calligraphy is really the basis of all, because it's about how you channel your energy through your arm and hands to that hard brush and the soft tip of the brush. It's all an extension of your energy, right? And you have to control that, and if you can control that to your whatever your needs are, you can draw, you can paint, you can do everything, you can write. So that's the very, very foundation.
I really felt that looking at your painting the strokes to make the man and the horse. I thought that was, that was just very reminiscent. One last follow-up is, when did you rediscover this? You said you were studying Western art and oil painting when you were in Oklahoma and elsewhere. When and how did you rediscover ink and brush?
Actually, between grad school and undergrad, I went back to China for 6 months. So it's like, that classic root finding journey that young people go through. And that was very formative. Because I didn't have art training as a young person. So when I went back, I was 20, 21. I had a teacher. And then he was a calligrapher and a very classic painter. So I just took classes with him every week. And it was funny because I didn't have a job while I was there, so all I did was just paint all day. I would write and paint all day. And I'll come every Saturday. I remember going to his studio, and he would just be amazed. He would be amazed of my progress, because most of his adult students, they practice once, like an hour a day at most. But I'm painting 10 hours a day. And he was like, he actually at one point point said, okay, you need to slow down. Because there's like, what's the next subject matter? I'm just like, I was so excited because I wanted to take it all in. But he did say my calligraphy was so bad. Because he was teaching me calligraphy and painting. And I could mimic, right? I could fake mimic painting, but you cannot mimic calligraphy. It's really real. And he was like, oh, this is so bad. He goes, all you need to practice are 2 words, just your name. If you can sign your name, you can get by. And to be honest, that's the wrong advice. And I took it, I shouldn't have. Because if I started writing calligraphy when I was 20, I would be much better at it now. Because it's a lifetime of, cultivation. That was not a good advice from him.
Here, I'll do you and then run around to that side. Okay.
Hi. I really appreciate learning or hearing about what you've learned in all of these installations and practices that you've had. So after having such deep discussions with the public and deep involvement with them, like with the organizers and then even in your garden, how has that inspired new ways of creation and your practice now that you've had those types of interactions?
It's a really super good question. And I think art making is kind of like an alchemy. We can look hindsight and go, oh, these are dots led to me. I can do that. It's actually very hard to, in the moment, and know what that is. Do you know what I mean with that? So, I've been doing this for 20 years. For me to say, oh, then I'm going to do this, I still can't. I can't. Because if I did, I know that it's a formula that I should not. So, for example, right now, we're talking about a project. And it's not something that I'm completely brand new, I've never thought of before. But I literally don't know what I'm going to do, right? It needs to come out of real conversation. It needs to come out of what are the considerations now? What are these conditions? And
it's a conversation,
right.
Like so many of your projects.
Yeah.
And it's about dialogue.
Yeah. So I think for me, I just try, and it's not easy, and I'm not going to say I succeed every time. I try to just be open, and I try not to, what my collaborator friend told me, Nissa told me, try not to rescue. I try not to come up with solutions right away, because that isn't my nature. I'm a doer. I do things. I get things done. I'm like that. So what I have to do is just to sit with the discomfort, not to rescue myself, not to rescue a situation, and just try to live with the uncomfortable, I can't even say truth because what is truth, but uncomfortable facts I'm finding, and then see what happens. I think something always happens, right? I don't want to seem like it's all.
Well, it's about yin and yang, where the contradictions, one door open, one door closed, or one closed door opens another one.
Yeah.
And it's evolving.
Right. I guess what I'm just trying to say, I don't want to seem like it's so arbitrary, just throwing sticks in the air and see what lands. It's not that. You obviously have explorations that you're into, and that's something I try to think about. I think about what you said, contradiction is something I'm very interested in. I noticed that resonance and dissonance are something I'm constantly thinking about. That's why I deal with a lot of dichotomies in the work. So I think I look for those threads, and I will look for things, how can I maybe make a work that I can show these things contradicting, but yet still are facts of life.
Coexisting. Contradictions coexist.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
We have a few more questions, and we're going to go around.
You had a question here too.
Yeah, but there's one
All right,
here
there.
and here. And we're going around. Everyone have a chance.
First of all, thank you very much for your speech. And I have 2 simple questions. One is, because I really like the smell of the ink, I'm just curious, was it possible to smell the ink and the smell of the plant at the same time? And the second question is, how was it possible to make installation out of paper? Because paper is really fragile, and was there any structural material that you use?
Yeah, good questions. So ink, traditional ink that smell is not all in all inks anymore. If you buy a large quantity of ink, they put preservatives in it. So we say the fragrance of ink is actually very stinky, you guys. It's only because it smells good. Sometimes if I'm using the old ink where I have to grind the ink stone, people will come into the house, in my studio, be like, they think there's something rotten in my studio. I'm like, no, it's just my ink. But if I have to work, like sometimes, like the project in Brazil was 600 kilos. It's like industrial amount. They put a lot of preservatives in it, so it wouldn't smell as bad. And some of them will even put fragrance in it, because I don't want people to be offended. So, but if you use the traditional ones, yes, absolutely. Question about paper. So some installations are made actual with paper, long fiber paper. That's very fragile. For the larger pieces, especially with the Cry Joy Park, I use industrial kind of paper. It's called Tyvek. It's like FedEx packs, you know, it's like almost like fabric and paper in between. So it's like but it's one that's specially made for me, for the thickness and the strength that I need it to be and the size. Yeah.
We have, and yes.
I love seeing your work. It's a great balance between exploration and meditation, and I think that's how you get results that you don't always know where you're going to go. So just a delightful presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And we have two, behind Luca, we have the lady behind.
Well, thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's very impressive how you managed to translate your pictorial sensibility and your life as an artist into these collective actions that also cover so many different realms, from directing an opera to working on a participatory project with people who have real tough experience in the jail, and at the end also to blend through movie and also animation, and yet they're all blended together by this visual rhythm that you create in these forms and shapes. But how did you, because we see the final results, and how did you progressively transform the solitary activity of an artist into this collective, very complicated organizational role?
I actually try to start simple. I usually start with an idea, a very simple idea, and it's often quite personal. So by the end of the project, I may not even talk about that very personal thing that started me off. But that is something I always keep at the basis. So if I get confused, I always turn back to say, what was it at that first moment when you had this idea? You know that idea, right? It makes you kind of skip a beat. You're like, oh, I haven't quite been there before. So being curious and, having that when you're doing exploring, you have that. You're like, okay, I'm going to hang on to that. So sometimes I do find projects get a little too complicated for me. And I have to pull back and have to say, I don't have to say everything with one work. Maybe that belongs somewhere else. Does this serve what I wanted to do from the beginning? If it does, I keep it. If it doesn't, I don't need it. And when I collaborate with people, I think selecting the right collaborator is the most important thing from the get-go. Because for me, if I'm going to work with them, I trust them completely. We have that conversation when we say we're going to do this. I said, well, this is what I care about. This is what I really believe in. And they said, this is them. We know we're going to work together. Whatever decision they make, I will support. And I really, really, really try my hardest to do that. And it doesn't always work, but for the most part, it does. But but that initial conversation is very important. We agree on the concept. This is a concept we serve. So it's not about your ego, my ego, everybody's ego. We're serving this idea. You're not serving me just because I invited you, but we're doing this. If it's good for this idea, we agree on it, then we agree that whatever goes for this should go. So if you have that I would say, I mean, from my experience, it's been 95% positive.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. It's a beautiful talk. My question is a bit similar to that one, which is, I would love to hear more about the relationship between, both throughout your career and within each project, between the materials that you're exploring, you know, your formal, what you're actually making, and these explorations of social, political environment, and how those things affect one another.
Okay. So maybe I can give an example. I think I'm always kind of going back to the same idea, is that I have a conceptual core I'm committed to. So, for example, the latest project we looked at, immersive, I knew about the paper sea. I just knew it. I could see it. I could see this blackness and this glistening wave. I just knew it'd be great. And I knew about the pendulums. My original idea before the pandemic was actually I was going to make 100 of these pendulums, and they would just be on an interval, and they would crash. And then when they crashed, they would just put new ones on and just swing. That was my original idea. I was very challenging the museum. I was like, go, let's talk about it. And then the pandemic happened, and I was just like, well, I can't do that, because I mean, we're in such, you know, the time, you just can't be doing that. It's just too traumatic, trauma for people. I would like to do that at one point still in my, sounds fantastic, no? Wouldn't you want to see that?
Maybe we'll do it here.
Oh.
Later.
And the moon came last, the moon and the people. I had this, I just felt like there's something missing. I don't know what's missing. There's just, I wanted something that really connected to the time we lived in, right? Really connected, but I didn't want to just speak only on allegorical terms, like, you know, a terrain, difficult time. I wanted something real. So I actually worked on another project where I used the moon projection of a live person performing, and then that came to me. But the content of all of this was not clear to me. But when I worked with Nissa Chow, when she came to this idea, and she really challenged my idea what oral history meant, because I was just thinking, oh, interviews, you hear that, you hear podcasts, and you know, you feel like you know. And she really crafted this side of things. So a lot of the questions, the prompts, how to do it, she really crafted it. But because I had the idea of a silhouette, because I want to give them, you can see a lot of characteristics of people, right? It's really interesting, but you don't know who they are. So that they are anonymous and they can speak freely and not feel like they're, you know, having their face like, you know, talking head. And also I just thought it would look cooler, much more interesting than that. But because I had that, I felt like that anchor. Then where we went exploring on oral history, which is something brand new to me, I was like, if I don't let go and just explore, I won't learn if I think it's just from what I know within my knowledge base. So I really went far with her. But because I had that visually tethered, I think we're able to hold it together. Does that kind of answer? Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and yeah, we're closing at 6 o'clock prompt, so they will force us to leave. So one more question.
It's me. Thank you for the most astounding.
If you can speak up a little bit.
Thank you for a very astounding talk for me. It's so encouraging to hear you talk about the struggles that you've had with trying to marry, or trying to answer the question of what is art, what is research, what is research art, and that kind of thing. A simple question. You talk about this oral historian who helped you with these interviews. It's something that's also very close to my heart. Did that oral historian also help you select the people you were going to interview, or did you do that on your own, or how did that actually happen?
Right. The museum helped me select because we want to work with Connecticut-based. Their communities is in Connecticut, the museum. We want to serve their community. So it's through their call to their public. And then we did 3 sessions. The first session was a smaller group, but then that session people said, oh, someone else will love it. So then it became bigger and bigger. The artist I work with, she's based in Brooklyn. So we're actually, I didn't have time to get into it, but we're working on a project in New York, taking this idea a little further on oral history, and visual language, which is super exciting. But next time, we'll talk about that next time.